The Middle East is bracing for further tension after the killing of Hezbollah's leader. Iran says Hassan Nasrallah's assassination will not go unavenged. Does that mean a direct war with Israel? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Hezbollah is still reeling from the killing of its longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah. As the group is mourning his death and weighing its options, Israel has carried out more strikes, killing another of the group's top leaders. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu argues that the assassination of Nasrallah will reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. And he's warned Iran, Hezbollah's main backer, that Israel's military can strike anywhere in the region that it needs. Tehran has vowed retaliation, saying Israel will regret its actions. But beyond words, what does this mean for an already volatile region? We'll discuss all of this with our panel of guests who join us in a moment. But first, this report from Kulthum Sharif.
Protests and vigils marked the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. From Lebanon to the occupied West Bank, supporters mourned the death of a man who, under 32 years of his leadership, transformed the group into a regional force and became a global figurehead of anti-Israel resistance. In Tehran, protesters chanted "Death to Israel" and Netanyahu. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei was among the first leaders to react, promising to avenge Nasrallah's assassination.
The strikes of the resistant front on the worn-out and decaying body of the Zionist regime will be even more powerful. The fate of this region will be decided by the resistance forces with Hezbollah at their head.
Analysts say Israel has challenged Iran by killing the Hezbollah leader. So far, the Iranian leadership has refrained from retaliation to the assassination of a senior Revolutionary Guard commander in Syria, or its threat to avenge the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Nasrallah's killing a historic turning point.
We have settled accounts with someone who was responsible for the murder of countless Israelis and many other nationals from other countries, including hundreds of Americans and dozens of French. Nasrallah was not just another terrorist, he was the terrorist.
Yemen's Houthis say Nasrallah's death has strengthened the anti-Israel resistance.
The Yemeni armed forces will continue to respond to the crimes of the Israeli enemy and will not hesitate to raise the level of escalation in defending Gaza and Lebanon.
The unprecedented Israeli attack that killed Nasrallah in Beirut came shortly after Netanyahu made a defiant speech at the United Nations General Assembly, promising to continue Israeli attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Israel's actions have been criticized by several leaders in New York.
We are at the brink of a major regional war. Even neighboring countries that long ago entered into peace agreements with Israel are under immense pressure. The situation is worsening by the hour.
Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging cross-border fire since last October, after Israel began its war on Gaza. But the violence escalated 2 weeks ago after thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies exploded across Lebanon, killing several people and injuring many others. Hezbollah and Lebanon's government blame Israel for the attacks. Now, the killing of Nasrallah is raising fears of an Israeli ground invasion in Lebanon.
It's not over yet. Hezbollah still has capabilities. Even now, our pilots are striking Hezbollah's terror infrastructure throughout Lebanon.
Israeli airstrikes have continued since Friday, displacing thousands of people in Lebanon. Hassan Nasrallah's killing has transformed an already complex regional conflict, and how Iran and other nations react could have major implications for the Middle East. Kulthum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
There is a great deal to talk about, so let's go straight into our discussion today and let's meet our guests. In Doha, Mehran Kamrava is Professor of Government at Georgetown University of Qatar and Head of Iranian Studies at the Arab Centre for Policy Studies and Research. In Durham in the UK, Robert Geist Pinfold is a lecturer at Durham University and author of the recently published book Understanding Territorial Withdrawal, Israeli Occupations and Exits. And in Calgary, Canada, Mohamed Ayash is Professor at Mount Royal University and a policy analyst at Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. Mehran, let me start with you. We're trying to make sense of what's going to happen next in the region. The problem, I think, is there are so many things we don't know. We know that Nasrallah is dead. We know that other key leaders are dead. We don't, though, know about Hezbollah's command and control. We don't know how much of its vast arsenal of missiles and drones and the rest has survived intact. That's the problem with this discussion, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, as you mentioned, there are more unknowns than there are facts that we're aware of. And importantly, we don't really know how Hezbollah is going to react. Will it exercise what the Iranians call strategic patience, or will it try and seek revenge for the death of its longtime and very influential leader? I think the next few days will be quite revealing in terms of the course of events to come.
Mohamed, I mean, you could say that Nasrallah is irreplaceable, but Hezbollah are going to have to replace this man who's been running the group for more than 30 years, known for his political acumen and his master of strategy. One assumes one basic point is that whoever takes over will follow his basic strategy, which is a strategy of resistance. And with regard to the current conflict, he made it very clear that he was not going to stop the attacks on Israel until the fighting stopped in Gaza, linking the conflict in Lebanon and the conflict in Gaza as one war, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if whoever takes over Hezbollah would move away from that position. Obviously, someone like Nasrallah, the irreplaceable part was his charisma. Let's be frank. I understand his strategic thinking and a mastermind and all of that. I believe those things can be replaced, in fact. But his charisma will be very difficult to replace. He managed to speak to people from a wide range of backgrounds, political ideologies, views of the world. He spoke to people living in New York as much as he spoke to people living in Beirut, in southern Lebanon, in Palestine and beyond, because of his charisma, in his communication skills and his way of communicating, his analysis of the region and the dynamics. So I think that part will be hard to replace for Hezbollah, but we will see, as the previous guest mentioned, it's difficult to know where things are right now. But I would be shocked if their fundamental position on Gaza and Palestine and resistance changes anytime in the near future.
Robert, let's look at this intelligence failure for Hezbollah, because it is astounding, really. This is a man who didn't make public appearances, didn't use the telephone. Security around him was so tight. I remember a few years ago going to one of his press conferences in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Terribly tight security. And then when you got in there, he wasn't even there. He was on a screen answering the questions from us reporters because he didn't want to be in any room where he could be at risk. Tell us what you think about the intelligence failure and the sort of capabilities that Israel clearly built up here. Were they technological or were they actually intelligence assets? Were they spies in Hezbollah's camp, in your view?
Well, I think if you look at what happened here, this is a case of Hezbollah underestimating Israel in the way that Israel underestimated Hamas, and that led to the October the 7th attacks. And indeed, I think that probably influenced Hezbollah's thinking here vis-a-vis Israel. They saw that Israel didn't see October the 7th coming. They saw the massive intelligence failure. It probably made Israel look quite a lot like a paper tiger. You know, Israel is famed for its intelligence agencies, and they either didn't see it coming or let those warnings, basically ignored the warnings that there was a Hamas attack coming. So Hezbollah probably saw that. and thought, hey, you know what? We're not as scared as the Mossad as we might be because of what happened there. But actually, that was a mistake, because it was the fact that Israel had poured all of its resources into monitoring Hezbollah, to penetrating Hezbollah, to compromising Hezbollah, that meant they ignored Hamas, and Hamas were able to commit those attacks on October the 7th, which led us to the current escalation, the war we see us in today. Any intelligence operative will tell you that, you know, this myth of an all-seeing intelligence agency is wrong. Intelligence agencies, like any other agency, have limited resources. They choose where to put them at direction from political leaders and from military leaders. And since 2006, all of those Israeli eyes, if you like, have been on Hezbollah and not on Hamas. And that is how Israel managed to carry out some of the recent attacks that we've seen. And Hezbollah, every single opportunity, underestimated Israel. There was the attacks on the pages, and then the next day, the attacks on the walkie-talkies. Hezbollah didn't throw out those walkie-talkies. You had incidents like the commander of the Radwan unit being hurt in a pager explosion, coming out of hospital, and the next day calling a meeting of senior Radwan commanders, who were all then killed by Israel. So it seems that at each turn, Hezbollah seemed to think, you know what, okay, Israel has used all of its secret weapons. We can now carry on with business as normal. And that is a mistake that Nasrallah paid for with his life.
Mehran, when we look at Nasrallah's time in charge of Hezbollah for more than 30 years, he was known as being pretty pragmatic and pretty cautious and careful in his decision-making. Is there a possibility that there'll be a new leader who actually is determined to exact revenge and could, in the short term, actually be more dangerous for Israel?
Absolutely. That's always a possibility. But as you mentioned, Hezbollah, particularly under Nasrallah's leadership, has demonstrated tremendous pragmatic streak that is unlikely to change. Remember that Hezbollah operates within a broader context of Lebanese politics. And we all know Lebanon is at the precipice of implosion. Unfortunately, it has been there for some time with tremendously high rates of unemployment, underemployment, basic services, state services are conspicuously absent. And so I think Hezbollah is in a situation where it can ill afford adventurism, no matter who's calling the shots. So I think circumstances would necessarily mitigate against adventurism at this juncture.
Robert, let me pick up that point. I mean, we don't know what has survived of what we believe was a vast arsenal that Hezbollah has. Isn't there an argument facing the new leader of Hezbollah, when that person is elected by the Shura Council, that the Israeli intelligence is so good, we better use our stuff before it's destroyed?
Yes, that's right. And we just don't know how Hezbollah will respond. But at the same time, it's hard to see Hezbollah actually launching a sustained, strategically calculated campaign now. They've lost so much of their senior leadership. They've lost also thousands of fighters from these pager and walkie-talkie explosions. And if they haven't been killed, then they're probably not able to actually operate in a combat scenario because of injuries, for example, to their eyes or to their hands. And as the previous guest mentioned, Hezbollah is very much constrained at the moment. It's constrained by Lebanese public opinion and a feeling that, you know, it feels like it's kind of on the ropes here. It doesn't want to invite Israel to basically launch an all-out war in Lebanon. There's a consistent and rightful fear that what happened in the Gaza Strip could happen in Lebanon. And also, I think there's probably voices in Iran, in Tehran. There's this debate between radicals and more moderates, with the moderates saying, for example, look, don't let Israel goad us into a regional war. That's what Netanyahu is pushing for, because Netanyahu wants to come out triumphant and say, yes, October the 7th happened on my watch, but I've managed to create such a new regional reality that Israel is more secure and more of a hegemon than ever before. So I think there's probably this feeling of caution in Iran and indeed in Hezbollah, and rightfully so. If you'd have said to me that a few months ago that Israel might strike Iran and might target senior Iranian leaders, I'd say there's absolutely no chance of that happening. Today, I'm not so sure. there really is no telling how far Israel is willing to escalate the current situation. They feel like the momentum is on their side. They feel like time is on their side. And I think the next potential step would be a grand invasion of Lebanon. I think that would be a disaster for Lebanon. And I think it could go very, very wrong for the IDF and allow Hezbollah to recuperate and recover their image. But I think, unfortunately, an escalation is on the cards.
Mohammed, let me ask you about Iran's role in all of this. Iran had a regional strategy. Hamas and Hezbollah, part of the axis of resistance, were the two key pillars of that strategy. And both are seriously damaged and degraded now. Does this mean a real loss of power and influence for Iran in the region?
It certainly seems so at the moment. Look, the balance of power is firmly on Israel's side militarily, politically, and economically, with, of course, the active participation of the United States and their imperial project in the region. Iran is not capable of winning a war against the U.S. It's not capable of ending Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine. People know that. I know that the discourse sometimes, of course, this discourse coming from Iran and from the resistance movements will tend to overplay their ability and their power to stop Israel. But we're seeing that the reality on the ground in terms of balance of power is still firmly in Israel's favor. And at this moment, Israel is using its political capital to its capacity, maximum capacity. It's using its military and economic power, if not to maximal capacity, then in a significant substantive portion of that capital. And Iran is not participating in this in terms of joining in as a regional war, precisely because they know that they cannot withstand an assault by a U.S.-Israel alliance. So I do think that their power in the region has been dealt a blow. But Iran also plays a long game, and Mehran can speak about this better than I can. But they play a very long game, and they understand that their strategic vision is one that needs a long time to develop. So even though they've been dealt a blow here, my guess and my feeling is that they believe that they can recover from this over a long period of time, so long as things don't escalate even further. And that's why Israel wants to escalate things. In my view, we keep saying that nobody wants a regional war, nobody wants escalation, and that is true, but I believe it's except for Israel. Israel is the one that actually thinks that right now is the moment to strike. They have, like I said, used their political capital to its maximum capacity. They think, well, right now we're in the dumps in terms of our international reputation, so let's go ahead and try to achieve all of our goals now and then worry about rebuilding our political capital later. So I do think that the Israelis are pushing for an escalation, pushing for a regional war. Iran understands that would not be in its favor, and hence why they're still hesitant to engage in that.
Mehran, you are someone who has studied Iran for your entire career. I want your take on how you think that Iran is going to respond now. You heard there Mohanna talking about a long game. It was back on the 31st of July that Israeli attack was carried out on Ismail Haniyeh. Iran said it was going to respond. It still hasn't responded to that one yet.
Exactly. And I think, as Mohanna just mentioned, Iranians play the long game. And in their view, they're actually making headway. Now, let's remember that from Tehran's perspective, the axis of resistance is meant as a deterrent against Israel. It is meant so that the next war is not fought on Iranian soil, but is fought outside of Iran. So whether it is in southern Lebanon or in Yemen or wherever where Iran's adversaries might be. And so the way Tehran sees it is that it doesn't necessarily want to engage in Israel in a long or in a head-on collision, but it wants to inflict on Israel death by 1,000 paper cuts over time. And
yeah, but
so
Mehran, you've already heard the suggestion that perhaps Israel will go a stage further now and directly attack Iran. And an interesting message on X, the former Twitter, from Jared Kushner, used to be chief advisor to his father-in-law, Donald Trump, in the White House. He said the reason why nuclear facilities have not been destroyed despite weak air defense systems is because Hezbollah has been a loaded gun pointed at Israel. And then he goes, there's no going back for Israel. They cannot afford now not to finish the job. They'll be hearing those sort of messages in Tehran and fearing that they're going to come under direct attack from Israel any moment, aren't they?
Well, that
and won't they have to act?
Yes, exactly. But that kind of rhetoric is nothing new. Iranians have heard it before, particularly from figures associated with the Trump White House. So the Iranians have been prepared for that. Now, if it actually comes to that, if Israel or if Iran gets the sense that Israel is going to actually attack Iran, then I think all bets are off. But for the time being, I can't imagine Iran falling into a trap that Israel has been trying to lay for it for the last several months.
Robert, what do you think Israel is going to do next regarding the war in the north? There might be people who advise Netanyahu, you've got to win here, stop your war in Gaza, stop your war in the north. But there's political calculations for the Israeli Prime Minister as well, aren't there? And members of his cabinet say they want both wars to continue.
Yeah, look, as a security studies scholar, if I was an advisor to the Israeli government, which isn't likely to happen anytime soon, I would suggest that, yeah, exactly. You've had these successes. You're on a high, basically take the off ramp, agree to a ceasefire and end things there. But I just don't think that's how Netanyahu is thinking at the moment. And I think that's why Nasrallah is now a dead man, because he underestimated Netanyahu. He miscalculated here. He thought that Netanyahu would agree to a ceasefire, that he could sort of do this low-level attritional warfare on the northern border to basically put more pressure on Netanyahu by making, all those causing that mass displacement of 60,000 Israelis, put more pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. And he just failed to understand Netanyahu, and he failed to understand Israeli politics. First of all, Netanyahu is beholden to a far-right coalition. These are not people who want the war to end anytime soon. In fact, we know that some of the opposition to the strike on Nasrallah came from far-right members of Israel's cabinet because they were worried this would disrupt their operations in Gaza. They want to keep quietly carrying out Israel's entrenchment in Gaza so they can resettle that territory. They were even, that's actually something that makes them a little bit more scared of a regional war and major escalation. And also, Nasrallah underestimated the effect of October the 7th on Israel's society. There were so many observers of Israeli politics on October the 8th who said, right, Netanyahu is finished. There is no way back from this massive psychological wound and physical and economic cost on Israel's society. Netanyahu is called the magician for a reason, okay? He just keeps on going forever. And basically in this scenario,
let me just bring in Mohammed now on what might happen next with regard to those 60,000 people from northern Israel that the Israeli cabinet is saying will be allowed to go home when they've created the right conditions. Given that they've made that pledge, does Israel have any option other than a ground offensive? Is that the only way that they can keep that pledge?
So to understand Israeli actions, you have to understand Israel as fundamentally a settler colonial project. And the goal of Israel since its founding is to create exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty over the entirety of the land of the historic Palestine from the river to the sea. And that means eliminating any resistance to that idea. So the October 7th became the pretext that the Israeli government needed in order to realize this dream of greater Israel and exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty over the entirety of the land, 100% of historic Palestine. They weren't satisfied with 78% of it that they took in 1948. And now they see this as a moment where they look at the resistance to that idea And it's happening in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, and it's happening in Yemen, it's happening in Iran, and it's happening in Palestine, in Gaza and in the West Bank. And they believe that this is the moment for them to expel as many Palestinians as possible from their land, colonize as much of that land as possible, and eliminate all resistance to that idea, to that establishment of exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty.
So given all that, Mehran, can a regional war be avoided? What do you think, as you look at the situation now, are the chances, what are the percentage chance, perhaps, of a regional war right now, a full-scale regional war?
You know, one of the things we haven't talked about is the United States, that has a lame duck president with an indecisive and dysfunctional foreign policy. I'm afraid as long as the United States continues on the same path, there is tremendous likelihood of an expansion of the war beyond the genocide in Gaza and now southern Lebanon.
So, Robert, your thoughts on a regional war? Do you think it can be avoided?
I think it can be avoided. I don't think at the moment, as things stand, it will be avoided. As I was saying previously, Netanyahu needs to be in a situation where he said, yes, he can say October the 7th happened, but look at what I've done since then. I've made Israel more secure, more safe, more prosperous than ever before. And that can, be talking to his constituents on the far right in terms of settling the West Bank. But it can also be in terms of taking out Nasrallah. For Netanyahu, the buck stops at Tehran and the Iranian regime. He sees all of this as kind of tentacles on an octopus. I think he's going to try and go for a headshot. He's had victory after victory after victory. This is not the same Netanyahu we saw previously, who, yes, despite all of his intentions, despite all of the nasty things he says, is a pragmatist at heart. This is a Netanyahu who has basically said, I need to stay in power, and it doesn't matter how many people I have to kill to make that happen. That can be Arabs, but that can also be Jewish Israelis, leaving the hostages in Gaza to rot, because at the end of the day, a ceasefire will bring down his government. An escalation that drags in Tehran won't.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks to all of our guests joining us today, Mehran, Kamrava, Robert Geist Pinfold and Mohanad Ayash. Please stay tuned as Al Jazeera's teams across the region bring you all the latest developments 24 hours a day with full analysis and context at aljazeera.com. We always welcome your comments and suggestions on our coverage. Leave them for us on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or find us on X, where we are at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha, please stay safe. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.